This time on Poll Hub, generics, as in generic polls. Here's the thing. There are no generic congressmen or congresswomen. There's no generic senators. So why are there generic congressional polls? What can they possibly tell us about the thinking of voters in the 435 House districts, or in each of the 50 states that would be voting for senators at any given time? On the surface, it seems pretty unlikely that a generic congressional poll would be of any use at all. But you might be surprised. This is Poll Hub. Let's get started. Hi, everybody. This is Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, the ad media journalism guy. What are you, Lee?
I don't know. I conduct polls. I teach at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I direct the Marist Institute for Public Opinion. And what do you do, Barb?
I'm Barbara Carvalho, and I direct the Marist Poll, which means other duties as assigned.
Oh, we'll do that on another poll. I want to know about the other duties. We're going to do that on another one. Today, though, this generic ballot thing, I've always been interested. As a reporter, I have to tell you, as a political reporter, I was very reluctant and, in fact, talked down the newsroom from reporting on generic congressional ballots in many cases because my argument was they don't mean anything. Who cares what a generic national poll? Oh, I would prefer to elect a Democrat. I'd prefer to elect a Republican. That is not what people do.
Well, let's just say what the generic question is, which is, if an election were, being held today, and this time we're talking about the 2018 midterm elections, are you more likely to vote for a Democratic candidate or a Republican candidate? And yeah, I get your point. It sort of looks kind of meaningless.
Well, however, if I can jump in here, I think it's a good indicator of sort of the mood of an electorate. And if you look over time, yes, you do see in 2006 the Democrats had a +8 on that question over the Republicans. So more people said they were going to vote for a Democrat for Congress, and in fact, the Democrats picked up seats.
30 seats.
30 seats.
2006 was a huge year. It
right.
was here in New York, for instance, I was covering a bunch of different House races, upstate New York House races, where there were Republicans, and the odds of Democrats winning some of these districts, it hadn't happened since the Civil War, and it happened.
Yes.
So 2006 was a big year.
Yeah, and then we get to the Tea Party election, 2010, and sure enough, the Republicans are up +10 in the generic congressional question and ballot question, and they do carry more seats.
63 of them.
And then
even bigger than 2006.
And in 2014, there weren't many seats still to be gotten, but they were up 3 in the generic ballot question and still picked up a handful
13
of seats.
So
Now,
it's directional, but does that mean it only impacts districts that are these alleged or legendary, depending on how you look at it, swing districts?
Well, yeah, you need to look at the districts almost on a continuum. In other words, from, solidly Republican to solidly Democrat. So when you look at it that way, you have a continuum from strong Republican to strong Democrat. And if you line up all 435 races, you're going to say, some of them are in districts that certainly can't be won by the other party. But then you do have a good, solid group, not just swing districts necessarily, because we kind of think of those that go either way, each time out. But it actually broadens, and, it might be a district that a Democrat can carry by 3 points or a Republican carries by 6 points. And it gets wider and wider on the continuum depending upon what the generic looks like.
All right, let's get the secret out in the open here. The big word here is gerrymandering. So there's not every seat equally in play as a result of the way districts are drawn. And what's been going on over the last several decades is that the Democratic seats have been really clustered in cities, and the Republican seats have been clustered in the suburbs and in the rural areas of the country, such that the Republicans are getting a built-in advantage. And if you go back to the same elections that we were talking about, the Republicans tend to get 4 percentage points more in the number of seats they have than the actual vote they get nationally. So in a sense, they run ahead of the generic ballot question when it comes to actually winning seats because of the way the district lines are drawn. So it's a little tricky, but really important.
So there's a lot to that, though, because I've done lots of reporting on gerrymandering, and we won't go into the whole history of how it's called gerrymandering and all that. It's been done by both parties, and only a handful of states redistrict with independent commissions, where an independent commission determines district boundaries. Otherwise, it's done on a purely political basis. So where Democrats control a state legislature, the Democrats may emerge with a better situation, and where Republicans control it. So one of the big things is that in state races, Republicans have actually done better. They've arguably much better organized. There's all kinds of reasons to get in the deep political weeds on this, but the Republicans have done what the Democrats do in their states, which is to draw the districts that favor their seats. So
you don't
I
have
just want to make sure. There's a lot of dispute about gerrymandering. It's in front of the Supreme Court for the first time in a long time.
There'll be some major court decisions in the fall.
Right, and it may be, you may think of it one way or another, but it's not as if it's a Republican scheme or a Democratic scheme.
No.
It's used in a bipartisan fashion to the advantage of the
Absolutely.
parties.
With the exception that in the current political atmosphere, the Republicans post-Obama control an awful lot of state houses.
Sure, more than they ever have.
And
Right.
so as a result, we're looking ahead to 2020 when the next time the district lines are drawn. And in fact, if the current situation, balance of power in the state houses remains the same, well, then the Democrats, even though they may be ahead on the generic ballot questions that we've been talking about, may not be rewarded with the same proportion of seats.
This seems to go to the whole question of the national mood, the national opinion about something, and the fact that we don't vote nationally. We don't vote nationally for Congress.
Exactly.
We don't vote nationally for senators. We don't vote nationally for president because of the Electoral College.
Absolutely.
So there's this real misconception, misconception, I think, that people think of, well, this person has 53% of a national race, or this party has 53%, and therefore they're going to get 53% of the seats. This isn't Parliament. This isn't a parliamentary democracy. That's not how we work.
Exactly. And right now we're seeing, at least in the Marist polls, we're seeing a 10-point plus Democratic difference in this generic ballot. So what does that mean? Nationally, Democrats are doing about 10 points better than Republicans. But that's a really good point. This is a district by district count. And Lee points out the fact that, the lines are drawn very often for political purposes from both parties, this time favoring Republicans. So what exactly does that 10 points mean at this point in time?
So what do you think? What do you guys think? I mean, you've been doing this for a long time. What does 10 points mean at this stage, more than a year out from the 2018 election?
You can't answer that question without the next two words, Donald Trump. Because a lot of what goes on in this whole congressional midterm off-year presidential elections has to do with the president in power, their party. So
and that's always true. So
yes.
that was true. That was
Absolutely.
true in
Very
'94 with Bill Clinton.
Yes.
That was true. I mean, I'm sure you're going to cite all these things. That was true with George Bush in 2006.
Yeah.
So it's not just a Donald Trump thing. It's a
No.
president.
And
The lower the approval
Barack
rating-
Obama in 2010.
Yeah.
Right.
And the lower the approval rating of the president, the worse off that party does in the congressional elections. And it's not even all things being equal. It's really pretty much a direct connection along those lines.
So that makes the generic congressional ballot actually a really interesting question and number when you carry it with the presidential popularity, because you begin to see if there is a spread there, that becomes interesting. Right?
And you should also think of it as a measurement of the brand. So, for instance, if it's the Democrat brand and the Republican brand, and who has the edge if you're really going into a contest between the two of them. And right now, what we're seeing is a plus 10 Democrat, doing better, but that also is then tied to the president and how people feel about him.
And when your approval rating is as low as Donald Trump's is, that usually means you get a shellacking, to use Barack Obama's word,
Which is what happened to him in 2010.
So it's interesting because if you look at this, there is so much historical precedence for this over the last 2 decades. So we're not talking about let's go back to the 1820s.
No.
You could do this. So 94, Bill Clinton coming out of the healthcare, trying to do healthcare, Clinton care. the Democrats were wiped out with Newt Gingrich's Republican revolution.
Sure.
Pause.
Clinton
And-
has a 39% approval rating.
And they lose 54 seats, the Democrats do in the House.
And then the next time in 2006, George Bush, having won re-election, but with Republican scandals in the House building up, a very unpopular president, maybe not as unpopular as he got by the end of his term, but pretty unpopular, House scandals, and that's a disaster for Republicans.
yeah, so you flip it.
And then Barack Obama, you talked about this, in 2010, having come in on the heels of the Great Recession and passing all the legislation that they did, including Obamacare, deeply unpopular among some segments of the population. What was his popularity in 2010 and what happened to Democrats?
Mid-40s in terms of his popularity, and which is where he was a lot of the time, and the Democrats lost the 63 seats in the House of Representatives. So now you say fast forward to 2018 and maybe we can look into these numbers and what are we sort of seeing? Well, there's no science to how many seats are going to get won or lost, but the Democrats, even who have lost all four special elections that have occurred, well, they were close enough in bad enough districts for Democrats to actually give them hope that there may be seats in play if in fact that replicates a year and a half.
Well,
from
look,
now.
there's good news and bad news
Yes.
for both sides of the aisle. We are in a very, polarized, very partisan, kind of electoral context here. And so Democrats are generally going to vote for Democrats. Republicans are generally going to vote for Republicans. And so what we're actually looking at here are the people who identify as independents, which is actually the plurality of Americans. So now, some independents say that they lean one way or the other, and that's okay. But they tend to not necessarily vote the straight party line. And so the secret is in the districts, not so much who the partisans are and who they're voting for, but who are these independents and who are they leaning towards? And the two measures that we look at is, one, the generic ballot to see are they leaning more to the Democratic side or the Republican side? And then we look at also the president's popularity among those groups.
Now, so you look at the 2010, the Tea Party is a good example that year. The president was the Republicans, I should say, were plus 19 among independents. So independents were not in love with Barack Obama in 2010, and that's the election, as we've alluded to, where the Republicans got a pickup of 63
seats, historic number.
Yeah, and the other one's the opposite. If you go back to 2006, which is a good Democratic year, the independents were much against.
Where are we now with
So,
independence? Now,
well,
you set up the
we-
softball's coming across the plate. I want to hit it out of the park.
but what we see is
We're
a
not-
lot of
we're not
discussion.
telling.
We hear a lot of discussion about how is Donald Trump doing among his base, and that's really not what we're looking at when we're looking at the numbers. We're looking at these independents, and one of the things that we have seen over the last few months and are going to be tracking to see if this continues is he really has lost support among independents and even Republican-leaning independents. So that's where the president's popularity has declined.
And then on the generic congressional ballot, do you look at independents there?
Absolutely.
And
They're in the Democratic side. So
at a larger margin than the population as a whole. So if it's plus whatever, what is it for independents?
So what we're seeing is that difference that we're seeing between Democrats and Republicans right now, it's almost entirely made up of independents.
Because they're the only ones who are actually changing their minds at all. Everybody else is
locked.
locked.
Okay, so
right?
now
they could do Donald Trump can do no wrong, Republicans. Donald Trump can do no right, Democrats.
yeah, but what's fun about looking down the road and trying to kind of set where this thing's all going to end up in a very, very unusual time for everybody looking at elections. Yeah, we see things that are leaning the Democrats' way, but then we also say, well, the Democratic base has had difficulty turning out in these elections. And when Obama was on the ballot, the Democrats did a lot better. But when Obama has not been on the ballot, the Democrat coalition, the Obama coalition, hasn't come together as well.
Right.
And
So
the
none of this is dispositive. And sure, we're like 15 months out. But what you're saying is that one other thing you got to look at least one other thing, is the intensity of support or lack of support from the base as well. So the independents are one thing, but don't ignore ignore the bases
Yeah,
because if Republicans don't turn out, well, it doesn't really matter what the independents do. The Democrats
and
will
that's
win,
why
and vice versa.
And that's why so much attention is being paid to, in Washington and around the country. And people look at this: how is Donald Trump doing among his base? Because they are most likely to turn out. The strongly approve folks are more likely to turn out than the strongly disapprove. Although there are a lot more strongly disapproved than strongly approved.
But hang on
we're
just
gonna
a
have a
second.
fist fight.
Just hang on just a second, because there is also a reason why the GOP should be optimistic, because there are limits to enthusiasm. We see that those who strongly approve of Donald Trump are more likely to say that they are actually going to vote than those who say that they strongly disapprove of Donald Trump. So that actually gives the GOP an advantage.
Some hope.
Also, Donald Trump is not losing his base to a great degree right now. Now, every day is different. I don't even want to say every week is different. It's every minute can be different. But it's really the last thing to go. It's really when a administration is in significant trouble and it's really over that the base cracks.
So this makes it really, really, really hard if you're a candidate running in a district. And here's why. If I'm a Republican running in a district that is not plus 20 Republican, it doesn't need to be a super swing district, but there's a lot of independents there, or a fair number of independents. If I run with Donald Trump, the independents, you're telling me, at least from the current generic congressional ballot, the independents are going to be like, no way, see ya. If I run against Donald Trump, the Republican base support, which I need, I can't win without them, are going to turn on me, or could turn on me, because they like Donald Trump.
And not only that, we haven't gone through the primary process. So
right, there could be primaries, but let's assume that I get through.
So the base is very, very important.
So let's assume, though, I get through the primary. I'm a Republican. I'm a sitting Republican, and I'm in that district. That's like threading the needle. How do you do that? That seems impossible.
You hire a top consultant, pay them the top dollars, and
also come on, guys. I mean, really, voters aren't always that cynical. I mean, what I think happens is that you need to mobilize your support. And one of the things that we look at is what is your choice here? Do you try to convince people who may not be in your corner to move over to your side, or do you just really try to persuade the people that are on your side to turn out? And for many Republicans, it's really it's the latter, because the Democrats have a turnout problem. They have difficulty mobilizing their supporters and getting them to the polls on Election Day.
Especially young people.
That's absolutely right. And, they have a lot of support among people who are under 30, but they don't vote.
All right, I'm going to go out on a limb here. Okay, can I do that?
Sure. You don't have to ask for permission.
Is this, someone once said
maybe forgiveness?
So that's what they say. Ask for forgiveness, not for permission.
Yeah,
so go for it.
Who said this is my mic? Ronald Reagan. This is my microphone.
Yeah, I paid for it. Yeah, okay. And you did pay for these microphones. So Marist did. So anyway, what do you got, Lee?
All right. So after Watergate, big controversy, all kinds of problems. The Democrats picked up 49 seats in the House. Right now, they need 24. If this scandal stuff is still as much in the air as it is, I think the House is going to be extremely close, even though the Democrats are 24 seats short right now. But I think there's a potential for them to make that very close and even maybe pick up a majority. But in the Senate, which is a lot closer, at 52 Republicans to 46 Democrats plus 2 independents, 48. The problem the Democrats have is 23 Democrats are 23 of the races Democrats have to protect the seats. Only
in the Senate.
In the Senate, only 8 Republicans are up. So this is the class of 2012, 6 years later, which was a good year for the Democrats. They have a lot more to protect. So interestingly, despite all we've talked about on this with the gerrymandering and the generic ballot, the House might be more manageable for the Democrats than the Senate, even though the Senate's a lot closer right now because they just got so much to defend.
So watch that generic congressional polling, because there's actually value to it. That's pull up for this week.
Righty. And we've been working really hard at this, and we want to know what you're thinking. So please send us your questions to pollhub@marist.edu. What do you make of all this?
And check us out, check Poll Hub out on social media too. At Marist Poll on Twitter, Marist Poll on Facebook, we're on Snapchat and Instagram. And please don't forget to subscribe.
That way you get us in your inbox every week, right as Poll Hub is released. Thanks, guys. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.